Tuesday Lunch and Learn webinar. My name is Michelle Rich, and I am the Associate Director of Program Development of Xavier Health. And the goal of our Lunch and Learn series is to advance your awareness of the driving forces you manage every day so you can lead with wisdom that would otherwise take a career to gain. In other words, we are bringing you topics that you normally don't think about and can increase your awareness of factors that impact your organization and influence the work you do each day, sometimes from a distance. Our mission at Xavier Health is inspiring collaboration with FDA and industry, leading innovation to develop breakthrough solutions, as well as make a difference to the future of global health. I would like to point out that the Lunch and Learn series is just one of the programs we lead. We have over 150 industry professionals and FDA officials engaged with us on various working teams, as well as committees and boards through the various conferences, initiatives, and professional development opportunities that you see listed here. Our focus is on pharma and device, but we often bring the two together through work such as the AI Summit, as well as Combination Product Summit. And we often identify opportunities to work together with FDA and industry through pilot studies and initiatives, as well as we look for opportunities to be a resource to you to learn through the Lunch and Learns like you are here joining us today, as well as our on-demand training toolbox and a custom medical device leadership certification. Through all of our events and initiatives, we are inspiring collaboration, leading innovation, and making a difference. Before we start, I want to say that today's webinar is going to be recorded, so the recording and slides will be available on our website soon after the webinar, and we will end with a Q&A session, so please send your questions to me throughout the webinar as you think of them. Use the question tab in your GoToWebinar panel to send your questions, and just so you know, they will come directly to me so they won't disturb our speaker. So with that, I'd like to introduce our speaker for today, our own Dr. Marla Phillips, who is Director of Xavier Health since 2008. She is an alumni of Xavier University, and as a matter of fact, she's also a Xavier Hall of Famer for her amazing soccer skills. So I'm sure she appreciates me sharing that with you all. Marla began her career in the pharmaceutical industry in 1996 when she joined Merck and took on roles that eventually led her to her position as Head of Quality Operations at Merck, North Carolina. She holds a BS in chemistry and a PhD in organic chemistry. And her background and her extensive experience in leading initiatives with FDA and industry experts make her uniquely qualified to discuss why quality doesn't matter. So hi, Marla. Welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you, Michelle. And I'll have to definitely pay you back for that introduction. So I can honestly say I didn't know Michelle was doing that. Anyway, so thank you. And I hope all of you listening are ready for an enjoyable lunch session. The topic, why quality doesn't matter, obviously is a little bit of tongue in cheek, especially as you heard that my background is in quality, and I love quality and I'm passionate about it. But at the end of the day, we don't seem to be making the difference that we were hoping that we would after decades and decades. And so I want to try to explore with you why doesn't quality matter? And so with that, I guess, with the first question of why doesn't quality matter, we could take a look at a couple of things. First of all, quality is a funny word. So I do want to point out that in the title of the session today, it's why quality with a big Q doesn't matter, but it also applies to why quality with a little q doesn't matter. So I'll point that out as we go through whenever I'm talking about quality as in the department and quality as in a feature. So just keep that in mind. So why quality doesn't matter? The quality department owns a term, as it turns out, that is met with resistance. I know that's probably shocking to a lot of you. Is reviewed as a barrier by cross-functional partners, has a history of not demonstrating improvement, as we've seen year after year after year that FDA findings are still the same. We could probably all give, the readout of the top 10, and the top 3 are always going to be the same top 3. It just doesn't seem to be changing. And, of course, FDA is basically giving us the answers to the test. They're saying, here's what we're looking for. We're going to come in and try to do an assessment and hope we don't find these issues. And they find the issues. So we have the answers to the test, and we're still not able to avoid the same findings again, decade after decade. Also, the quality department owns a term that is not easily defined or understood. So the first one I want to explore with you is the top one, is why is this met with resistance? And I always said that if I had to go back to school and do it all over again, I'd go into psychology, because I love to figure out why people do what they do. So this next slide is fascinating to me. Oh, first of all, I'll just say, you know, who wants to be signed up for this job if everything's met with resistance? But the good thing is the paradigm can be shifted, and it all starts with quality. So let's find out what's going on. So back to psychology. So on this next slide, you know, I want to point out that our minds as human beings are not built for quality. We're built for efficiency, and that's how we've evolved. So thank goodness, you know, that we're built that way. But I'm just going to pause for a second and let you take a look at this slide. See if you can read that. Okay, and hopefully you're having fun with that. It is very surprising how fast you can read that. Only smart people can read this. I couldn't believe that I could actually understand what I was reading. I mean, it's like it's written perfectly. Our minds are not built for that. They're built for efficiency, but yet quality demands that we pay attention to every single detail. And as soon as we let go of, you know, forcing our brains to pay attention, it's going to slide into efficiency mode. So yeah, we are seeing the same issues over and over and over again, year after year, decade after decade. The bottom line is the commonality in all of this is the fact that we're all human. So, you know, we do have to look for ways to get around this, to mitigate this, because it's not okay just to say, well, we're not built that way. So the other thing that I mentioned on that first slide, as far as like what's going on with quality, is that it's not easy to define. So how is quality defined? You can hear people say, well, reliable, consistent product cures the patient, no patient harm, product is always available, less failures, more efficient process, product meets specifications, state-of-the-art facility, trained and educated employees, greatest value for lowest cost. All sounds great, and I'm sure you've heard all of those, or a mixture of all of them. But then if you look at those, you can ask yourself, well, what do we mean by reliable or consistent or cures the patient, no patient harm, always available, less, more, meets specifications, state-of-the-art, trained, educated, greatest value. So, you know, we could go on and on and on and actually tease out what do we actually mean by what we're saying. And unfortunately, you know, you have different stakeholders internally and externally. And if I ask them what is the definition of quality, you're going to get about as many answers as there are people. And that's our challenge. You know, when we say we want to improve quality or ensure quality, there is no one thought of what that means. Now, on the next slide, I'll show you that AdvaMed, which is a trade association on the device side, had industry professionals and I believe FDA involved as well on, you know, how can we define quality for what they were trying to tackle with the case for quality. And they came up with this and agreed upon it. But, you know, and I'm not even going to read it to you because the point is they spent months on it and came up with something that they agreed upon for how they were trying to use the word quality. But, you know, when you look at that previous slide, it can really be just interpreted so many different ways. And that's the challenge when we're trying to ensure quality and you have so many different interpretations of what that could be. So here's another one I hope you enjoy. So basically, beauty is in the eyes of the beholder, well, so is quality. So the top left box, it's, you know, this is a tree swing, and this is how the customer explained it. Then to the right of it, how the project leader understood it, how the analyst designed it, how the programmer wrote it, how the business consultant described it, how the project was documented, what operations were installed, how the customer was billed, how it was supported, and at the very end, what the customer really needed. So even if we just look at the top left and bottom right, there's that disconnect from what we think quality is versus what quality is actually needed. And so that disconnect doesn't help the situation either. So if we can't define quality, then how can we increase quality? And what do we mean by increase, as we've talked about already? But the other question is, do we actually need to increase quality, or is the current state sufficient? So you hear a lot of people saying, oh, we have to improve quality and increase quality. You also need to take that step back and ask yourselves, whether you're in quality or the other cross-functional groups, is that actually needed? Because you don't have to increase just to increase. And there is a point where it's actually working perfectly, and let's just leave it alone. How can we gain cross-functional buy-in? Can you personally buy into something you can't define? Well, maybe. So there are situations where you can buy into something, especially if you have a charismatic leader who's painting a vision. You can't quite define it, but you know what, I think I can buy into that. But can you co-own something you can't define? Well, not really. So our cross-functional partners, you know, are scratching their heads and get frustrated with what we're trying to do in quality, but we can't blame them because we can't even define it. So how can they co-own it with us? And then, so in the end, does quality and/or quality, big Q, little q, really matter? And my take on it is it doesn't, as we're operating today. So what can we do differently?
Well, that begs this question then. If quality doesn't matter, then what does?
Yeah. So if quality doesn't matter, what does? So consider this. If I asked you to improve quality today, what would you do differently? Okay, so think about that. Your task right now, go back to your office, or if you're in your office, clear out your emails, just get everything out of the way. And if I asked you to improve quality today of what you're doing in your job, what would you do differently? Just think for a second. What would you change about what you're doing? I'm asking you to improve quality. Okay, so you're thinking about it. And how would your colleagues answer this question? And whether it's senior leaders, R&D, operators on the floor, purchasing, training, HR. And I would assume, and since we're not all in the same room, I would assume that in the top bullet, it would be very difficult for you to put your finger on exactly what you would do in action. Like, what would you actually do differently? And if you're having that same struggle in your mind, imagine what your colleagues would be saying, whether it's the senior leaders or operators on the floor and everyone in between. So the next question is then, notice the change in how you might be reacting if I said this to you. If I asked you to improve the right first time rate in everything you do starting tomorrow, what would you do differently? So improve the right first time rate in everything you do. Can you imagine what you would do in action starting tomorrow? Okay, and the reason I had starting tomorrow, because if I was answering this, I would say, well, I would start tonight by going to bed early and getting a good night's sleep. I'd wake up in the morning and I'd have a good, nutritious breakfast. I'd be ready to go. My brain is firing. I would start off so that I would be all set to do everything right first time. And then I would look at the processes I have in place, or the procedures I'm following, or the efficiencies that I could identify. I could actually identify things to get out of my way. So then, if you ask your colleagues the same question, it would be a very interesting dialogue. It could be senior leaders saying, well, you know, we need to invest in this other equipment or this software program that reduces errors. R&D would say, I'm going to try to design quality in at the source. Operators on the floor would look at different ways that they could reduce errors. And purchasing, maybe they would say, you know what, I'm going to try to find a supplier that has the best quality for the best cost. Training might look at competency-based in a new way. HR might say, I'm going to try to put in processes where we're hiring the right people for the right job at the right time with the right education. So it starts dialogue, and you can actually start picturing what you can do in action when you're asked, how would you do something right first time versus how would you improve quality? So the impact of this is, if you and your organization focus on right first time, then compliance becomes the natural outcome. And cross-functional partners become co-owners. And that's the key. They can co-own it. Why would they not want to try to do things right first time? Who wants to come in and say, you know what, I want to do things over and over again, because that sounds like a lot of fun. So you don't even have to ask them to try to improve their right first time. You could look at ways where you could co-own it together, and it would be something they would be excited about. Like, wow, you're actually helping me with this.
Well, seeing quality through a different lens is so important. So when you are really trying to look at this, how can quality become the greatest asset to a CEO of a company?
Right, great question. So let's start off with what we hear a lot. We often hear, especially from the quality department, and again, I'm from quality, so I'll criticize my own background. You know, how can we get the CEOs to change their quality mindset? You know, what's wrong with them? Why don't they buy into this? Or, my gosh, we dread our quality management review meeting. Our cross-functional peers do not collaboratively participate. I'm dragging the data out of them. I'm running around the morning of the meeting and trying to get their data and their charts. And, you know, this is miserable. And then I have to present it, and there's no dialogue. We just kind of check the box and leave. So these are the things we hear a lot. And if you look at it, you're hearing it from all different levels. So the people above you and your cross-functional peers. So and certainly people under where you are. So if you're hearing it from everywhere, what are the chances that everyone else is wrong, right? So what I'd like to challenge you with is maybe stop and ask, what are we doing wrong? Okay, and then if you look at that, there's a greater chance that you could actually affect a change. If we change the way we're operating, we'll see a change on the other end, so the action-reaction. Okay, so can you answer this question? If we look at that senior management review or the quality management review meeting, how would you communicate the value of that meeting to any of your stakeholders? Okay, so if you're saying they don't value it, they're not participating, how would you articulate the value and why they should come to that meeting? And we did this with 2 different groups of industry professionals, and there was some significant pause before they started to generate some ideas. So the fact that it wasn't just this elevator pitch that rolled off their tongue like, well, of course I know the value, and I'm used to communicating the value. That'll tell you that if we can't communicate the value, then why should they come? Do you want to go to anything where nobody knows the value of what they're doing? So get to a point where you can jot down and then articulate the value of what that meeting is, because there is tremendous value, and there's value to all these levels of management and your cross-functional peers. Okay, so then another question that might help you in breaking down some of those barriers is, can you identify what the barriers there are that inhibit the effectiveness of that meeting? So think of your cross-functional peers, think of all levels of management. What are the barriers that are in place that are inhibiting the effectiveness of that meeting? Instead of saying, why won't they participate? Why won't they give me their data? Say, well, what are the barriers? And how can you make that better? So then the last question is a little bit more challenging. And if you can answer this, then you'll be in great shape. How can the barriers that you identified in number 2 be addressed when senior management is not bought into the value? Okay, so now with that question, it's forcing you to really own numbers 1 and 2. You have to own the fact that this meeting has value. You have to be passionate about it. You have to break down the barriers. And by being able to do this without having senior management buy-in, that's forcing you to influence without authority. And when you're influencing without authority, the return on that is so much more significant, and it's deep. Instead of, our senior vice president said you have to come. That doesn't really go over too well. So if you can actually articulate the value of what you're doing, then the others might actually be able to buy into this with you. Okay, so how can quality become an asset? Quality can become an asset by understanding where you fit into the larger business of your organization. So stop focusing on tasks all the time. I mean, you've got to do the tasks, but stop focusing on the tasks. Like, we have to close out these investigations. We only have this many more days, or look at all these complaints, or look at the trend, or what's the root cause. That's great, but put it in the context of the larger business. Okay, if you can see how what you're doing, those tasks are so important, but how does that impact the larger business? So even if you simply change the statement to, we need to close these investigations so that we can get operations back operating, so we can get product out the door to the patients we're trying to serve. Okay, gosh, why would I not want to do that? Okay, and that's just a simple example, but if you can start, again, that it comes back to that articulation, the value of what you're doing. Okay, the other thing that most employees, not just quality, but if we're saying how can quality become an asset, then this certainly applies to quality. Understand where your company fits into the global competitive landscape. So understanding the larger influencers on the work you're doing. So for example, you have a need for 3 more quality people in your department, and your senior management comes back and says no. So your automatic response is, my senior management does not buy into quality. They don't get it. Okay, and this is just an example, but if you take a step back, and you might be able to see that, hey, our company is losing ground in this facet of our business, and it's clear that we're going to be going out of the business with the work I'm doing, the products that I'm supporting. So why would they invest more at this point in time instead of let's maintain status quo, or we're getting into an acquisition standpoint? So, helping yourself to understand where your company fits in kind of makes the rest of your work make sense. Okay, so again, how can quality become an asset? By communicating in terms that will drive desired behavior across the business. So instead of number of open CAPAs, number of failures, 483 observations, FDA warning letters, what if you shifted to the number of days off the market, number of man hours wasted or saved, greater net profit by a certain percent or a certain number of dollars? And that these numbers can be improved by increasing the right first time rate and predicting failures. If you communicate it in those kinds of terms, now, if you look at the second bullet where you're saying the number of days off the market, because we have not been able to close the corrective and preventative actions, that's fine. But all we ever communicate is, here's the number, here's our backlog of open CAPAs, here's our backlog of investigations that are still open, and look, we have this spike in number of failures. Put it into context so that it makes sense, and it's going to help you co-own the business with your senior leaders. So it has multiple benefits. So to continue, how can quality become an asset? By understanding risk, intended use, and stakeholder needs, both internal and external. And so risk is a term that quality is very used to talking about, but I'm talking even beyond quality risk. So what are all the risks associated with whatever has happened or with whatever you're trying to push through as a new initiative? What are the risks of not doing it? What are the risks of doing it? What are the benefits? Can you communicate in terms of business terminology instead of, well, the benefit is we won't get a 483 write-up, or we'll avoid a warning letter. That's kind of, I guess, a weak argument. It's kind of a cop-out, for lack of a better term. It's so easy to just say, well, the FDA will come in and we'll have enforcement action. If you actually involve yourself in the business and try to understand it deeper, then you're going to be a better partner for your cross-functional peers. The other one is we can become a better asset by removing the barriers instead of, here's another initiative, here's another way of doing something, here, do this instead, here, do this on top of what you're doing. In order to remove barriers, you have to understand the business and the operations. And so if you are removing barriers, and in some cases you have to do something extra, but in most cases you're going to be looking at streamlining and efficiencies in a way to do things to increase the ability of your cross-functional peers to do things right first time. Okay, so again, by streamlining and simplifying the processes, but my favorite might be by becoming champions against nonsense. If you can really look at all the things that are coming up as far as like this big quality strategy we have, well, does it really make sense? And again, going back to, does quality really need to be increased? That's not always the case. So I'm not saying rule everything out, but if you can take that step back all the time, take the step back and ask the question, does this make sense? You're going to be a huge asset, no matter where you are in the organization, and as you continue in your career path, inside and outside of quality. So being a champion against nonsense and asking the question why is just invaluable. Okay, so kind of to summarize, because we went through a lot of concepts, and I hope that I've given you something where you could go back and maybe try something a little bit differently, like, do we even know how to define quality and things like that. So I want to summarize it because there was a lot that we went through. So we basically said quality doesn't matter because we can't define what we own. So currently there are many opinions, but what if in the future you focused on right first time? So how would you do it right first time? We use fear tactics to influence. So there's FDA enforcement looming all the time. Versus looking at the future, could you change to conveying the value to cross-functional partners, the business, and the patients? Okay, we measure the means detached from the end. So currently we're focusing on the open CAPA, the failures, the OOSs, the complaints, and I could go on and on and on. But it's detached from why does that matter? Okay, so the future, what if we talk about time off market and, oh, it's because of this failure that we keep having, or the CAPAs that we can't implement that would prevent it, and things like that. Production downtime, money, etc. We don't understand the business. So currently we communicate in stories and data and studies. And it's really funny. We actually had a program on the device side where we took professionals over a course of 11 months through a 10-module session. And they came to present face-to-face to an outside panel a capstone solution that they came up with to the case study we gave them. If we had given it to them the first day, they would have told you, okay, well, this is what happened. This is what we looked into. These are all the studies we tried. These are the failures we had, and these are the ones that worked, and would have, ended the conversation. What the transformation that occurred in those 11 months was unbelievable, where they started off communicating the impact. So, for example, they would say, okay, I need $1 million. I need two full-time employees for 2 months, and we're going to be back on the market within 6 weeks, and really demonstrating, this is the outcome. Now, let me tell you why that is, and here are your options. And ending with, I need a decision, instead of just, I want to tell you everything I've ever done and ever thought of, because, we're quality and we're scientists. And so we want to make sure that everybody understands everything. So really, if we don't understand the business, we can't even communicate in ways, not only terms, but in ways that the rest of the business does. So the good news is we don't want quality to own quality, okay? We don't. So if we shift our paradigms towards everyone owns right first time, and quality removes the barriers, then at the end, you will have that co-ownership that you're looking for. So we really want to shift that paradigm to have that co-ownership instead of, quality owns quality, and everyone can picture how to own right first time. So
that is excellent, and it's actually inspired a lot of questions from the audience. So a couple of things before we move into the questions is, first of all, thank you, Marla, for all of that information. But also, for those of you who were joining maybe a couple of minutes late, this has been recorded, and it will be available on our website shortly after the webinar closes, probably in the next 24 hours. So, but to move on to some questions, do you see some of the issues with the FDA's metrics a direct result of the variable definition of quality?
I don't, mostly because the FDA, FDA both on device and pharma side, so FDA's initiatives driving that, because the lack of understanding of quality has been around forever. Trying to identify how to define quality is something that just from human nature is hard to define. There's so many opinions to it. And the metrics initiatives themselves, I think, are suffering in trying to figure out how do we identify companies that really have a commitment to quality. Is because quality is so ambiguous of a term. So I think it's very difficult for us to put a finger on, well, here's the one metric that's going to do it. And unfortunately, I know that the goal for the FDA Metrics initiatives is to reduce first of all, it's to shift the ownership of quality to industry, but also there's only a certain number of FDA resources that they can send to do investigations. So if you are looking to reduce the amount of FDA resources, then we can't say, okay, instead of asking for this one metric or 3 metrics or whatever it is, we have to do this entire maturity assessment, because then that's going to take almost as many resources from the FDA to even do that. So then you could look at third party, which is what's going on, perhaps on the device side. But the bottom line is there's no simple way to identify which company has a stronger commitment to quality than another. Each company has their own personality, so you can't say this is the culture that will always give you high quality, because the personality from one company to another and the leadership from one to another is different. The situations are different, and there's no one right culture either. So sorry for that long explanation, but the metrics initiatives are very convoluted, because it's very difficult to put a number on quality.
Thank you. So this is a little bit of a different perspective. Isn't true quality an investment in performance excellence? Do it right, do it well, at the right time, and in the right amount.
Yes. It is. Yes, the true quality. To say true quality means that there's just one definition, but that is one way to describe quality. And so obviously then if you're investing in the equipment, the people, the resources needed, you increase the chance that the product will be right first time and that it will meet the intended use of the patients. But when you use the word quality, that's when it just becomes ambiguous. So you do need to have those aspects included in how you would define quality, but it would just be included amongst all the other ways that it was defined.
Okay. Well, this is a little bit longer of a question and may need to be addressed in some other ways, but continuous improvement is a valid need and aspiration. However, it can violate the idea of defining quality in terms of what is needed or quote unquote required and sufficient. So how does the continual improvement requirement lead us into continual failure to improve, if it does? And please comment on this semantically and practically.
Very good. So, and if that's okay, could you repeat it one more time?
Absolutely. So continuous improvement is a valid need and aspiration. However, it can violate the idea of defining quality in terms of quote unquote what is needed or quote unquote required and sufficient. So how does the continual improvement requirement lead us into continual quote unquote failure to improve, if it does? And comment please semantically and practically. And
okay.
they do admit that it's a difficult quandary.
Yeah. So it's but I love this. Like I said, I love psychology too. So right. So if we're going to define quality, it's almost like this is quality, but yet we're asked to continually improve. And so does that mean, well, that wasn't quality? So it is a challenge to look at how can we continuously improve. But one thing to remember is that the world is not static. And so what might have been a good practice previously might not be working for this new workforce that's coming in. Maybe they're trained differently. We have all 5 different generations in the workforce. They all think differently. But then also the continuous improvement also means that we take advantage of I hate to use the word improvement again, but improvements on technology that are out there that didn't exist the first time we said, this is it, this is quality. So continuous improvement also means that what you had before might not have been wrong, but we can make it better. And so you might use enhanced technologies. So now the question comes back to my other question in the presentation was, do you have to make it better? Isn't good enough good enough? So it depends. If the continuous improvement would reduce perhaps the opportunity for patient harm, then maybe before it was okay and the incidence level was low, but maybe now this makes it lower. And if it wasn't something that was critical, then or even major or even minor, you could say, well, that's fine, but we don't really have a problem, so we don't have to continuously improve that. So you're right, this is a question that, you could give like an entire week-long class on, but I think the challenge is that we do want to continuously improve because we do want to continuously be able to do it right first time. And right first time not only means your actions and operations, but meeting the needs of your patient. And if the needs of your patients are evolving, even if their expectations are evolving, then your right first time has to evolve. So long explanation, and that barely scratches the surface of that question, because that's a great question.
Thanks for the great question out there. So that is awesome. Thank you for that answer. So should the quality group identify all the stakeholders and then understand their needs and goals? For example, the stakeholders being the patient, the FDA, the company, other departments, etc.
Yes. So if you're going to try to understand how to do it right first time, you have to understand what you're trying to do and what you're trying to achieve. And there are internal stakeholders and external stakeholders. There's one interesting exercise we had, that group of medical device participants that I mentioned earlier that went through that capstone experience. We actually had them go and interview their cross-functional peers and do an assessment of your objectives and their objectives. And there were cases where they found, wow, we're actually trying to achieve the same thing. I'm quality and you're purchasing. That's like unheard of, right? Don't you only care about cost? And so, actually realizing that, okay, we're actually trying to do the same thing, or that there was some circumstances where their objectives were conflicting. So you were trying to do one thing one way and I'm doing something the other way, and we didn't even realize it. So identifying who your stakeholders would be internally and externally, and then having the conversation. Don't try to assume. Don't get in a room with other quality people and say, well, what does purchasing really need? What are they trying to do? Actually go talk and have that discussion, and then you're going to have a much more robust understanding of what their needs and expectations are, which will allow you to do it right first time.
Great. So we have just a few more questions, so we'll continue on, and then those of you who have to drop off can always come back to the recording if you'd like. So would this approach that you're describing require the quality group to identify the impact of quality issues and then start measuring the data to show management the value of quality and also to show the improvements? So I can ask that again.
Right. So I think the question was, so if you go out into operations, just as an example, and there's a lot of different opportunities to make things better, do you want to just start going after all of it? And so the answer to that is you want to take that step back and figure out, well, what's the impact, and start prioritizing. And in some cases, you might say you have to do the benefit risk analysis, and that's what's going to resonate with your peers as well. Even if you say, well, the benefit risk analysis shows that maybe it financially, maybe it's showing it might not be worth it, but let me tell you the other angle of this, and it's the patient side or something like that. But even the fact that you came forward with benefit risk analysis or cost estimates would show them that you're understanding the business, and now will you partner with me on this? And if there is a disagreement, you can have the discussion. So yeah, you would have to not just start going after everything, because that also you instantly lose respect on that. You're just killing us. We don't have enough resources to do what we're trying to do. And then actually showing that you understand that you have to prioritize it and do it in a way that's not just, well, this one would be a 483 if we don't do it right away. It's, let's talk about what it actually means.
That's awesome. So this is an interesting question. Sometimes supplier quality is the issue, in which components are non-conforming. So what can a med device manufacturer, for example, do to extend this effort to their suppliers?
Right. So that's got a whole host of different nuances in it. So there was a clear answer in my head until 3 seconds into it. I'm like, wait a minute. When you say the device industry, my understanding of the device industry, coming from pharma, is that there's often a time when you don't have leverage. So if you throw that factor into it, it makes it a little bit more challenging. So one way is, let's assume you receive a component that has a defect or is not functioning the way it's supposed to be functioning. Maybe it meets specifications, but the variability is not acceptable. Whatever it is, you're going to be rejecting their material, or you're going to set up the contract the next time to say, we will only accept this, or this, and it's going to become tighter and tighter. Obviously, if the supplier wants your business, they are going to accept your terms, and now they're looking at financial loss. So why wouldn't they want to do it right first time? Now, if you don't have leverage, it's a whole different discussion, and so you would have to look at what relationships you can build with that supplier, and oftentimes on the device side, I know that you can't even do that. So it might be, what would you have to do to mitigate the issue, assuming that there are no other suppliers? So I went way beyond your initial question, but I just know there's a whole bunch of nuance with leverage involved in that question. So if you're able to communicate to your supplier on the fact that you respect their need to have a business and to have profits, so if you respect their business and demonstrate that the components that they're sending you need to meet certain specifications so that you can buy a ton of it. And not only that, but we'll be able to rely on you and we'll use you for more business. And not only that, but I'm not going to say, can you make it cheaper? So if you are behaving in a way that engenders trust, you can have those discussions. If you're just going after the cheapest cost or not being respectful of their business, then you're not going to be able to get too far with that. So that's a very convoluted, all of these are, because it's a lot of this is psychology, but there's a lot of different if-thens to these questions and answers, but I hope that addresses some of that.
I think so. So do you have recommendations in how to tease out or overcome what appears to be a behind closed door deal? I'm not sure if we may need clarification.
So because you could have a behind closed door deal even internally. So if you're saying you're trying to get your cross-functional peers to buy in on something that you're trying to do, but there's this
little clarification.
Okay.
You're saying internally.
Oh, internally.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So okay, and it's hard to know what the exact situation might be. I'm trying to imagine. So you're trying to lead an initiative that would benefit the business, but there's this behind the doors closed deal that they're going to do it a different way, and there's going to be barriers put in place. It's kind of hard for me to describe an answer unless
they're coming in with resistance. So let's see if we can
piece that together. Let's see.
Hold on a second. We've got to scroll up a little bit.
Okay.
Do you have recommendations how to tease out, overcome what appears to be a behind closed door deal that is internal to meeting resistance?
Okay, so then maybe if I substitute some of this person's later terminology, so then how to tease out behind the door resistance, or so maybe they're not coming out and telling you I'm not doing it. So it's kind of like passive aggressive, perhaps.
I think maybe we need more clarification for that. So whoever submitted that question, if you wanted to reach out to us, we could probably get an answer to you, but just in light of time, I don't know.
I guess the one thing I would say though is if you have cross-functional peers who are not working with you, they might not be outwardly working against you, but they're not working with you, is always to revert to the conversation. And if you can revert to the conversation from their angle. So if you could come in and say, you know what, I'm trying to understand what your goals and objectives are this year, and how can I support you? Or you know, what's your biggest barrier, or what barrier am I putting in place that I could help remove? Just have the discussion from their vantage instead of an agenda you're trying to push, and start talking openly about how you can work with each other. But yeah, you would have to do it from their angle, not yours. And then certainly, you know, if there's a bigger issue involved, then you would at some point have to get senior leaders involved. I mean, you can't have people not supporting having the quality of the product. So,
well, excellent. I think we had a very robust discussion, and I think there's a lot more discussion that people would be interested in having in the future. So thank you so much for preparing this and sharing it with us, Marla. We really appreciate it. And thank you to everyone who is online. Did you want to have a final word?
Yeah, and I was going to say one more thing, which I almost forgot. So we are pulling together a forum of chief quality officers across pharma and device. And the topic that it looks like we want to be addressing is how do we redesign the entire field of quality operations? And that's why we chose to have this lunch and learn today. So immediately after this lunch and learn, I believe you get it in an email. It might pop up in your browser, but there's a poll that will ask you 2 questions. And I will take your feedback directly into this forum, and we're going to be having our first meeting in the May-June timeframe. And I think the question is, I wish quality would stop, ... and I wish quality would start, ... So if we could get a perspective on, you know, how quality, as in big Q, how quality can improve, we'll take that directly into that forum and would appreciate your input.
That is excellent, and an excellent way to engage with everyone who is listening. So thank you to everyone who joined us today. Please join us again next month for our 3rd Thursday Lunch and Learn. We appreciated all of the fantastic questions as well. So hope you have a fantastic day.
Okay, thank you.